They readily accepted me in to the program, and within a couple of months into my internship year and during my senior year, they hired me as a full-time staff person. So I graduated, had a job to step into, and enjoyed working with many American Indian tribes, and the experience working with a large system. At that time, Portland had over 180 schools and programs, and we serviced all schools, and so that meant I was on the road, driving from school to school, working with, by referral with American Indian students. Like most Alaskans, I got very homesick and decided it was time to come back to Alaska. And through one of my sisters, Andrea, who was working and her background with the Johnson O'Malley program, another educational support program, I learned that the Indian education program, Indian Studies, here in Juneau was available and applied for it. I ended up shifting the emphasis of that program from largely academic tutoring to social studies integration, and through that was in the realm of curriculum development. And the curriculum development that we did was very unique, however, and keep in mind this would have been 1991, 1992. We focused on what now has a name. You know, we talk about place-based education, the integration of culture and place into curriculum. And through my tenure with the Indian education program, Indian Studies, with a wonderful team of individuals, we developed a K-12 curriculum to supplement social studies instruction. Through that, that curriculum landed me a position on the National Indian Education, or excuse me, the National Commission on Social Studies. There was a group of university folks, senators, departments of education from around the country that were looking at how best to address curricular change in social studies, and so I spent 3 years on that commission, and it was all based on the curriculum work that we did with the Indian Studies program. I'd like to acknowledge Glenda Lindley is in the room. She worked with the program and assisted greatly with the development of the elementary curriculum. And there are others here, Nancy Douglas, Cadiente, Angie Lunda, Julie Folta, some true experts in the field who I would say shared a passion around working with our students and believing that as a school system there are ways that we must better address the needs of Alaska Native students. I was, through opportunity, again, decided that it was time to grow personally, and I actually gave one of my nieces, Dion Cadiente Leidy, who is in the back of the room, hi Dion, advice because she was getting ready to graduate and was looking at colleges, and I said, you know, you have everything that it takes, and then some. Apply to the top 10 institutions in the country, put your application in, and I realized that as I was looking at college programs for myself, I needed to follow my own advice, and so I ended up applying for and was accepted to Stanford University for my master's work. It was an amazing and challenging, intensive year, and I was very privileged to meet a wide range of wonderful individuals, peer students as well as faculty. Through that, and what brings me to today to share with you was that you can only read and research policy so much, and then but when you're working with students, you want the doing part. And so I had a wonderful advisor who allowed me to create my own course. And what I wanted to land on was looking at my mother, Irene Cadiente's, educational experience. And that led me to what I'm going to share with you today. Let's see. The broad premise of my research was just the wonderings. What was schooling like for our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents? And education has always been, and I hope will not always continue to be, a source of great anxiety and stress and frustration. But I put my sights on my own mother in my wonderings, and it certainly opened the question for all. What was schooling like in those early years? The research began from this very precious photograph that we have. It's perhaps the only photograph we have of my mother. My mother is, let me see if I can use the pointer here. Right there. My guess is she was approximately 7 years old in that photo, and I've always loved that photo because you can see her energy. She looks like she's ready to bolt and run and want to play. She's barely standing still. And when she received this photograph, it opened up some stories. This is Bill Faucet, for those of you familiar with Juneau. He is an elder residing in Juneau. And I remember her pointing out these three young ladies, in particular this woman, or young woman. She was a high school student, and my mother would say she was so nice. She was so sweet that she would help anybody, and I just loved her. And also pointing out that she was white in a predominantly Native school. So that was where I started, and I thought that I would be looking primarily at the time of her schooling, and through my research I kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and actually ended up way back in 1867 with the sale of Alaska and what was happening around schooling for American Indian and Alaska Native students. Some of you may be familiar with, in 1869, the peace policy. The peace policy was really what I frame as a land-grabbing time where the federal government was looking at lands moving. There's a great movement moving American Indians to reservations, and the notion of what do we do with these people, and so the notion of Western thinking of an Indian problem. Whoops. I'm sorry. I shifted the computer from over there to here, and so it might just be pinching on the wire. Just a moment. I was just going to say, I saw Techie Mark. Is there anyone here that? Thank you, I'm sorry. So that looking at the time is in that period of time with the working with a group of people and identifying their needs, the most common aspect of that is acculturation. And how do you meet the needs of population and the focus on schooling as an answer. Here we go. Help is on its way. It was working and on. I'm not sure if this is just pulling on it or... Thank you. Don't go far. Okay. There really, at that time too, there was not a Department of Education as we know it. There was the War Department, and so it was very convenient for both churches and for the federal government to turn to church groups who were coming forward with the idea of not only acculturation, but for helping people new to Christianity to embrace the notions. And I think the mode of acculturation meant, one, first and foremost, communication. How do you communicate with these people to teach your doctrine? So language perhaps was first and foremost, and access. How do you reach the young people in terms of structured schooling? So by 1873, keep in mind Alaska has transferred over to the United States. 1873, we have reservation schools that start to receive federal government aid. And keep in mind that church doctrine is at the heart of the primary training. And some call the peace policy the religious policy for that reason. So this would continue for many decades. I should point out too that we were raised, my family, my siblings were raised in a Catholic private school in Juneau, here in Juneau, St. Anne's, and sent there by our parents. We didn't enter public school systems until 6th grade on up, because the St. Anne's school was first grade through 6th grade learning opportunity. So lots of subsidy, lots of money. The government is still trying to address matters of American Indian people and now Alaska Native people. So in 1877, Sheldon Jackson, as many of you know in the room, is really heralded with establishing schools in Alaska, revered by some, not so popular by others, and certainly he was controversial. He actually came in 1877 for the first time to scope out what was happening in Alaska. In some of my research, I learned that he would have been about 50 years old when he first came to Alaska. He was in Colorado, and some of my research showed that he was actually being pushed out by the Presbyterian Church and put out to pasture, and in some regard. And he did not take that lying down. He felt there was still room to grow and do. And he, through his lobbying efforts with Congress and his determination, he actually put himself in a very good position to receive the vast majority of federal aid. I haven't translated it, but $25,000 in 1878, that's a lot of money. And He also was greatly influencing federal policy. Keep the money coming. There's a great need. I learned too that he wasn't actually in Alaska. He set up his offices in Washington, D.C., and that's really what made him such a loud voice, because he was there lobbying for the challenges that existed in the time. He was becoming such a powerhouse that there was actually a committee of leaders that the federal government put together, and he was summoned to attend. I believe the meeting happened in New York. And in that meeting, there were two things that happened. One was that the federal government was looking for a way to remove themselves from the business of education, at least as it stood through the Department of Defense. And then there was great challenge by other churches that wanted a piece of the pie. They were seeing him funneling his funds into the Presbyterian Church, and they wanted their fair share. So as under President Grant's administration, the peace policy was adjusted, and in that meeting, they actually divided out Alaska between 5 different denominations. So you have the Lutheran, who were actually here before the Presbyterian Church, the Presbyterian, the Catholic, the Moravian, and Russian Orthodox continued. So it was a challenge for him. Some of his criticism was about that, his passion around Alaska Natives, and what was happening in Alaska at that time too wasn't one of those our boom and bust economy. It was a boom economy. There were a vast growing number of whites coming into Alaska, and then whites with families. And families wanting an education for their children and only seeing the mission-run schools. So there was already a loggerhead of tension that was growing. So Alaska's struggling to become a state. And this is actually Joyce Thorson, one of our social studies teachers from Yakutsk, Dakahiti, is here. Welcome your response as well, or impact. But the Organic Act of 1884, our first attempt through the territory of Alaska to establish governments, and this allowed for really where we are today. When you talk about school systems and wanting local control, that's what Alaska was all about back then, that there was a civil government and they wanted to do things their way. They wanted to meet the needs of their populations, and you can't really look at a town without looking at what are the needs of our children and how best to meet them. So we're looking at federal schools at this point, and now a foundation of funds that would allow for the territory to begin developing schools. And then the Organic Act, one of its high points was the additional money to supplement what was coming from the federal government. And the establishment of segregated schools, because the foundation really is that language was still a dividing factor in the focus of education in Alaska. And when I'm speaking of Alaska, I think my emphasis area has been Southeast Alaska, but these were issues happening across the state with varying challenges. So you can see, I just wanted to point out just the rapid rise of schools that were in existence. With the span of 2 years, looking at 60 related day schools, that's across the entire state of Alaska. And then where you start to see the division, the segregation that was happening between Native schools and white schools. And not surprising, they were established in areas where there were population concentrations. And so within a very short span of time, 14 federally run schools and 15 mission schools throughout the state of Alaska. And growing controversy, the frustration that was ensuing by the growing white population about what they wanted for their children in terms of access. That controversy that I touched on continued to grow. Sheldon Jackson lost his job, which basically, when you talk about losing a role, it wasn't that he went away, but it moved him away from the money control, really, that he had. There was still a transition. Remember that Committee of 10? There was still a transition that was happening between what the federal government was doing in terms of contracting with churches and the newly established Bureau of Education, our first Department of Education, established in 1895. So they're still figuring things out. There's a shift, but by and large, the churches are still heavily involved in the role of education in general, and specifically with Alaska Natives. So in 1905, we had come across the Nelson Act, an act of Congress, and establishing a second school system to educate, quote, white children and children of mixed blood who lead a civilized life, end quote. That through that basic act, we have very defined segregated schools, and very much a judgment of control of conventional knowledge, and what the general educational system believes that Alaska Native and American Indians should know, and in part that leading a civilized life. So it's just laden with the burden of judgment. So by 1903, I would point out too that there were 82 missions in the state of Alaska, 16 Presbyterian, 16 Russian Orthodox, 14 Episcopal, 10 Catholic, 6 Methodist, 4 Moravian, 4 Congregational churches, 3 Quaker churches, 2 Baptist, and between 4 and 5 Swedish and Norwegian Lutheran within the state of Alaska. That's a pretty rapid rise in schools in a very short amount of time. And then I through reading and research, took a look at the Organic Act of 1912, and this is where the Alaska Territorial Legislature is developed, and within that, a strong subset of priority around preparing for and establishing an Alaskan school system. And interestingly enough, this, keep in mind, we're still a state boom. There's gold being discovered. There's revenue to be made in discovery. And the sale of business licenses and the reorganization of secondary education, the vast majority of the business licenses were for liquor sales. I wanted to point that out. So our school system is based on alcohol. Alcohol sales, I should say. And this quote, some research, the study of Tlingits of Alaska was reprinted in 1970. The photograph here is actually of Alexander Sasha Sobolov and Ann Hunter Sobolov. Ann Hunter would be my mother's aunt, and so just 1914, you can see, one of the things I personally observe and feel about Alaska Native people, and in particular Tlingit people, is how adaptable we are and how innovative we are, and how we can incorporate new knowledge into our cultural knowledge and come out even stronger. The quote, "He who writes of the natives of Alaska a generation hence will have a different story to tell. Every year sees changes in the lives and manners of these people." It's kind of an understatement. And certainly we have to ponder what is the change that's happening with us today. A lot happening in this next span of 10 years, and from 1920 to 1940. My mother was born in 1927. She's not in the room, so I can say that. She'll be here later, and I'll report that I did that. But this photograph actually, and it's not the best quality on the screen, but I just wanted to point out this is a photograph taken in Angoon, and it's an organizational meeting, and some of the early foundation work around establishing not only the ANB and ANS as a strong leadership position to advocate for Alaska Native people, but also citizenship. And in this photograph is our grandmother, Ann Hunter, and her aunt, Minnie Johnson. Minnie Johnson's Tlingit name is Ashkuk'e, and my sister Barbara carries that name. And you see, I love that there's a Salvation Army woman in all her attire. I have a photo of this if any of you enjoy old photographs on my laptop that I'd be happy to share. But an organizational meeting all about advocating for Tlingit people. In 1928, student enrollment overall is 5,000 students. Lots of concern too around the idea of civilization and what you have to give up in order to attend a territorial school. One of the gems that I discovered through this research that was really quite eye-opening and thrilling to read and discover is that in 1935, Anderson and Eales provided a report to Congress on the status of Alaska Natives. In 1933, they were commissioned to come up to Alaska, and they did a whirlwind tour of Alaska. They didn't spend as much time in southeast Alaska as they did in other parts of the state, but it was really one of the most comprehensive studies that's pretty awe-inspiring for what they covered in terms of not only the physical ground that they covered, but that they left no stone unturned that I could see. They looked at curriculum, they looked at teacher education, they looked at student academic achievement and performance. They looked at the physical setting, the actual, the school structures that existed around Alaska, and came away with some conclusions. This is one of my most thought-provoking, perhaps, quotes. Since it is not advisable to hasten unduly the process of civilization, the guiding principle should be an adjustment of the elements of the new and the old cultures, rather than the ruthless substitution of the new or the old. One of their first statements in their review of the status of Alaska Natives in relation to formal education. And why that sung to me so strongly is that that's really some of the groundwork of expectation that students are expected to conform to the school, to the curriculum, to the teacher, and leave who they are at the door. And I think that incites some painful memories, even today, for most of us. But that was a quote from 1933, their initial blush of their survey of schooling in Alaska. They continue to say the Native people, as is clearly shown in the chapters on tests given and their curricular needs, are not fitted for the same education as the white children of the territory. Their futures are dissimilar, their learning capacities are not equal. You know, when I first read that, yes, that is an ouch. Again, because it's laden in judgment. And, you know, I certainly read that and feel the sting. However, consider that, what if we looked at that lens that they were superior? Through their families, through the wisdom of their cultures, through the anchoring of identity, truly they were, as a formal system, we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. So the Anderson and Eel recommendations called for the training of teachers to improve the quality and the recruitment of Alaska Native teachers. They also suggested that the curriculum needed improvement and that it should be tailored to the population that it's serving. So in part, they were recognizing the vast difference between the different Native groups throughout Alaska. And their recommendations led Congress to reorganize the Alaska Native Service, which was transferred from the Office of Education to the Office of Indian Affairs. So the foundation of the BIA schools happened as a result of their time in Alaska and their report to Congress. And then I won't go too deeply into this period, but I did want to point out a few things. The Anti-Discrimination Bill is addressed and passed through our state territory legislature. And that was through the result of the heavy lobbying. You know, I respectfully bring forward Elizabeth Peratrovich. However, I also know stories from many people that there were many hands involved with that effort, and by and large, the important work of the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Sisterhood to keep the pressure on and to lobby and keep their members and their communities informed. There were, through the Alaska Native Service, the BIA schools, there were approximately 4,250 students that they were serving, by that time attending territorial schools. So what was happening during that period of time was really a lot of battling between the Alaska Native Service and the territorial schools. They were fighting for teachers, they were fighting over curriculum, ours is better. It's an interesting span of time to read the research, and I think, at least with what I was researching, they spent more time bad-mouthing each other than anything, you know, the politics of it, which I can't help imagine was rooted in the financial or economics of the time as well, of who was doing a better job and fighting for students. This kind of sounds familiar from today. So the educational issues, I wanted to revisit those. So we have the call for culturally responsive teaching. And what does that mean? It means that you are tailoring the curriculum to your students and that you are not putting them in a position of leaving their identities at the door. What are we teaching and how are we teaching it? You know, the curriculum, one size does not fit all. And again, you know, to stretch it statewide, that each region of the state has its unique knowledge and its unique style of learning and teaching and mentoring that needs to be taken into account. And the notion that certainly in particular perhaps for Alaska, that you can't embrace a canned curriculum and assume that it's going to have an outcome of reaching all of your students equally. And I touched on that briefly, the rural versus urban challenges, the reality of the diversity of the state of Alaska, and that the challenges for rural Alaska, the villages throughout the state of Alaska, as well as the shift in populations for village students coming to urban areas is something that we all know about, but we haven't necessarily addressed what does that mean, what are the implications, and what do we do differently to adapt to more effectively teach our students. The recruitment and retention of high-quality teachers, paramount. Certainly would draw on my experience as a principal with Yokosuka Dakahiti Alternative High School, that the beauty of that program as a model is that the teaching staff for Juneau in that program are there by choice. They have a passion for the population and a passion for teaching. And that is evident in its success rate, in particular with Alaska Native students. But how do you recruit and retain high-quality teachers throughout our state? Pre-service teacher preparation. That simply means how are we preparing teachers that are in college, preparing for the field of education to be the best they can be, to arm them with the tools that they need to reach diverse learners, to really maybe take the lid off to say, what are we doing, and are we truly preparing them for being effective in the classroom, in particular with diversity. Money, certainly the economics unique to our state of Alaska and the nation. Money makes the world go round. That's unfortunately true in the field of education as well. Chasing the buck. Once you have that money, how are you allocating it? The issues are very challenging, and they're very ugly. When you get in the throes of making decisions that perhaps are unpopular, or that you're going with the status quo. There's the complexities of the economics that are related to education. You don't hear that talked about very often, but I really wanted to emphasize that whether you're talking about whatever issues in education, teacher preparation, in-servicing, the curriculum, it comes down to money. And the understanding of the barriers to education. The majority of my career has been here in Juneau, and I would say, the barriers can be very real. They certainly can be imagined. They create all sorts of challenges in the classroom, as well as, whether it's something that beyond your control that's happening away from school that's coming into the classroom, but how well are we prepared to support the social and emotional needs of all students? So these educational issues, I would imagine that as you were seeing each of these bullets, they're really nothing new. They're long, hard issues that we're very familiar with. I put these forward because these are the issues in the 1935 report by Anderson and Eales to Congress. they're very current for today, aren't they? Sadly so. But the players change, the population changes. The issues are really at the heart of this is what I wanted to bring forward, that there are reasons and policy decisions that have been made that impacted us in the past and certainly continue to impact us today. And so I urge you to pay close attention whenever your governing bodies, whether it be from the governor all the way down to the school board, are making decisions on behalf of you, behalf of your child, behalf of our children throughout the state of Alaska, that you tune in. I encourage you to find your voice and challenge the thinking and remain student-centered in your mission. Through that, and I wanted to impart on you that you, and this is from Enid Lee, putting race on the table and keeping it there, that we in Alaska should not allow any conversations around education to not include conversation around race. And it's, I used to say, even way back when I was first working with students in Portland Public School, that if I had a nickel for every teacher who would say, I treat all of my students the same, I'd be rich. I would maintain that you don't treat them the same, that you provide them an opportunity, but you also challenge yourself to tune into how they're uniquely different and help them embrace that. I would imagine for any generation, our first and foremost desire is to fit in and to be accepted and to be affirmed. That's in part human nature. I look at the burden that our previous generations carried, where they faced the admonishment and the physical punishment. For me, that was my mother. Those were stories directly from my mother. Now it might be a little different, as maybe someone can say that was my grandmother's experience or my great-grandmother's experience. But that notion of being judged and being expected that you'll leave part of you at home or at the door of the classroom or the school. So I thank those of you who address race, who speak of it, who challenge yourselves to learn more about the various cultures of Alaska, and with the open heart that you know you can learn from it. Thank you for that. It's not on that list, but I see that as know your allies and be an ally. Be an advocate for our students. Teacher training, a lot of these bullets are very similar, but the ongoing professional development, one size doesn't fit all for students, and it does not fit the same for teachers as well. Build on the teacher experience as well, and really look at high levels of collaboration. I've seen it done magically with the Indian Studies program curriculum, where it was a learning process for our teachers, but in the end they learned to, whatever anxiety they were feeling, to let go and embrace elders in the classroom, embrace the teaching that was offered, and as a result they saw their students blossom. There was a direct correlation with the success of that program. It was the curriculum ringing true to not only our students, but the families. Yes? Okay. Right this minute.
Sorry, Ronalda, I had to make an announcement. We've expanded your time for 4 more hours, so you can just take your...
I don't know how they'll feel, though.
So if you need to take a break now, no, just teasing. The program in the back announces tonight's dinner. It says 7 p.m., but it's at 6 p.m. So the Andrew Hope III tribute dinner tonight here is going to be at 6 p.m. Okay, so 4 more hours, Ronalda. We're looking forward to...
Have a seat. Okay, culturally responsive teaching. My thanks to Gold Belt Heritage and Sea Alaska Heritage, both for the efforts that they've pursued in assisting the school with this effort, as well as the various teachers that have stepped forward to be that ally and look at deeper collaboration for the benefit of students. That remains an ongoing priority. Place-based education, that term, we've seen it work magic with our students, when they're resonating. And for me, I think what it drills down to is identity and belonging. And it's curriculum that's not just for our Alaska Native students, it's for all students. That connectedness, that interconnectedness, that people-to-people understanding, the valuing of Native cultures is the richness in place-based education. So I thank those of you that continue to carry that mission on. The notion of equity, I touched on that earlier around the economics of school, and to pay attention to how funds are allocated and what the priorities are, and are we headed in the direction that we value for our children. To be actively involved and not having it done for you, which is really the scary heart of education, is that it's being done to us, and to not allow history to repeat itself, that there are steps and actions that we can take to improve our environment and the education for our students collectively. But paying attention to equity in terms of the decisions that are being made by our policymakers. Parent involvement, it's so interspersed for me throughout any bullet. There are certainly some hard, painful stories of students losing the right to have a say in education in our history. And I just urge you as parents to continue to let your voice be heard with your teacher, with your principal, with your superintendent, with your policymakers. And recognizing that intergenerational grief is just so inherent in our experiences. I know from my own personal experience that learning more about the policy of the times and the change and the turmoil that was always part of education as it was defining itself, that my mother was like a little yearling being, tumbling through the river and trying to find her footing, and the impact that made, experiencing the physical punishment, caused her a lot of pain that we certainly experienced and learned from her. How that translated, from my perspective, was her aversion to schools. We were sort of in it on our own. We would get the message very clearly from our parents that do whatever the teacher says. Behave, do well, learn, with the expectation of good grades. But the aversion of her not wanting to step foot into a school. I remember when I was going to graduate in my senior year, they had a parent meeting for seniors, And I just wore her down by asking her to come with, come, there's a meeting, I'm graduating. And she was like, no, no, no. And she said, you go there, they'll talk, they won't listen, and then you leave. And she finally was convinced to come with me, or for me to go with her. She wouldn't go on her own, but sort of like, will you go if I go? So I remember that walk down the hill and to JD High, and what she predicted was exactly what happened, but I was so proud that she was there. And we walked all the way home, kind of giggling and laughing about what happened in the meeting. No one listening to each other, kind of planning happening. No one, no real outcome, but she was there and did it for me. Some of you might have been in the session that she was in yesterday speaking about some healing that she experienced in teaching language at a camp with the Indian Studies program. We had a camp out at the Boy Scout camp, and she agreed to come out, and she spoke about her experiences with the language and punishment, and she was moved that a young girl in the group that she was speaking to, and she describes her blonde hair, blue-eyed, came to her with tears in her eyes and hugged her and apologized for the wrongs that she had experienced. And that was a blessing. That blessing would not, and that healing would not have happened if it weren't for the efforts of the Indian Studies program, for the push for culturally responsive teaching, for the introduction of native languages. That has a bit of a resurgence now as the teachings are available in the school. And it spurred further conversations, about stories and experiences, and then especially so when I was learning Tlingit, studied the language for 3 years and 2 intensive summers, and she reluctantly became my tutor, and it was with her kicking and screaming. My father passed away at age 98, and it wasn't until he was 80 years old that he shared with me his sorrow about not teaching us Ilocano, being from the Philippine Islands. And it was because they were protecting us. They didn't want us to be treated poorly because of language. They knew that was their experience. And so it was, was categorized an act of love to protect us. But through that, again, I guess our relationship, my mother and I, is like, she knows I can be persistent. She can too, more so. Maybe that's where I learned it. But she became my tutor. So out of exasperation, she would start correcting my pronunciation of whatever term or word I was struggling with to pronounce in Tlingit. And finally, it was like a floodgate opened where she and I actually teamed to do some Bible translations for the Catholic Church. And she thought, isn't that ironic? They want me to speak Tlingit when they're the ones that washed it out of me. So I hope that I helped write that experience for her by introducing Bible learnings in our church, the Catholic Church in Tlingit. And she continues to persevere and be strong and focused. This is my mother today, and her Tlingit name is Chikehla. That word is describing holding a child, and it's in reference to holding many children sort of in that crook of your arm, or more this forefront arm. That's a close translation to what Chikehla means. And isn't that beautiful, the beauty of Tlingit culture and native cultures, that name is exactly what she has done in her life with many children and grandchildren and now great-grandchildren. and in that safe crook of her arm that she's now teaching language in the public school system here. So I dedicate this research to her because it would not have happened without her, and it is so important that we look at the challenges of the past and look at where we are now to hold them safely in your hand, to bring them forward so that we don't repeat some of the vast mistakes that we've made. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I want to first and foremost say Gunalchish for your time and effort in learning and in education and in nurturing others. Gunalchish. $500,000. Oh, that's my husband, Daryl. He just converted the $25,000 into, that would have been $500,000 that Sheldon Jackson had at that time. I think.
Testing.
Yeah.
In terms of your teaching in place, are there any teacher training programs in the villages? You have teacher training for degree levels, but I'm just talking about citizens in villages who come right into the schools and team teach with the accredited teachers.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be a wonderful target. I know through the School of Education there's a desire to look at, in Alaska specifically, it's not uncommon to hire aides that inadvertently become the translator and the doer in connecting the new teacher to the community, and how can we honor their work and support them and in landing on a degree not only for what they've already done, but some training to make them even stronger and ideally become teachers themselves. I would say it's probably community by community. I can only speak of Juneau and the students that I've come to know through the PETAS program, who are very articulate in identifying their needs and driven in their desire to become a degreed teacher in order to carry on teaching. I worry about here locally that we've lost so many Alaska Native teachers within the staff that it's like a setback. You know, we've the PETAS program has graduated, I believe the number is up to 74 students since its inception of Alaska Native students for the state of Alaska, predominantly Southeast Alaska. Just in the last 2 years, we've expanded to statewide. And in the last 2 years, we've graduated, let me see, by this December, we will have graduated 16 new teachers. So it's an ongoing effort, and I think the most powerful recruitment tool has been word of mouth. So within your communities, if you know of individuals who you'd like to refer, I put my business card and brochure about the program on the table. And just please help spread the word. We need more teachers. And then Joyce had a question or comment?
I'm going to try to talk loud.
Teacher voice.
My teacher voice. Yeah, that scares me. Do you know any more, Ronalda, about Anderson and Elle? I mean, yeah, they were this regression report, but do you have any more background on them?
Actually, yes, I do. They were both professors at Stanford University. So it's a 2-volume set, and I wonder if I was the only person that ever pulled it off the shelves, because in any vast library and their collections, it's a leather-bound 2-volume set, and it's incredible. I'm thinking it's time to go back to Stanford just to go. It's a reference material, so I could never check it out. And if it wasn't for my good Catholic upbringing, I probably would have packed it in my suitcase. It's so precious. But what I loved about it was it brought schooling to life for the times. It included quotes from teachers. It included quotes from students. It included actual copies of student work. It was incredibly deep in the amount of research that they were able to pull together, and then synthesize it into their outcomes. I remember one story. It was a piece of student work by, I think he was a 4th grade boy in the Kuskokwim area, and he's writing, it's a language arts assignment, and he's writing this fun story about being out berry picking, blueberries, which are different than our region, very low to the ground, and they're picking berries, and a bear comes across them, and so they're startled by the bear, and they take off running, and he's talking about the berries flying from the bucket, and torn about, going back for them, and grabbing his little sister by the hand and pulling her along to get away from the bear. It's this wonderful story. Their conclusion to that story, which was very rich in its detail, and if you look at today's standards in terms of having voice and punctuation and ability to write, it was very rich. Their conclusion to that particular piece was that it was inadequate for his age and his ability, and that it was remedial by comparison. So there's interesting pieces there. Many teacher quotes, teachers that they interviewed, many descriptions of the physical plant of the building and what shape it was in. What I appreciated too about the report was they were experiencing it firsthand. They weren't relying on any form of leadership to give them the answers. They were very thorough in their investigations. At one point, when they came up by ship. We're in Southeast very briefly, and then they went further north, and then they split off. One took the south area of the state, the other took Kuskokwim, and then they met back together and went up to the northern parts of the state. And then their money ran out, and they wrapped it up. They were on a very tight timeline, came back together, and that's one of the reasons they split, was their timeline, and then came back together. So I think that's why Stanford, it's in the Cubberley Education Library at Stanford. But it's a worthy read for the complexity. I'd have to say, too, I have not seen in any of the vast number of reports that have come out anything quite so thorough on education in the state. Here she comes.
I'd like to thank Anish. I think your timeline was put together really well, and I like how you dedicated to your mother. I'm so hard at, my eyesight is so bad, I'm just wondering if I can get a printout of your timeline, please.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to share it with anyone. I will. And I'll check my bag. I may have it on a jump drive that I'll give you. All right, if there are no other questions, again, thank you so much for your kind attention. And a reminder, tonight's honor banquet, 6 o'clock. So have a great rest of the day. Ganal Sheesh.